Chief Justice, Associate Justices, and may it please the Court, Your Honors. I will talk about genocide and war crimes. My partner will discuss crimes against humanity. We will begin looking at the charges, and then go into the evidence. Article 6. Genocide for the purpose of this court. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, a killing members of the group B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Article 8. War crimes. 1. The court shall have jurisdiction in respect of war crimes, in particular, when committed as part of a plan or policy, or as part of a large-scale commission of such crimes. 2. For the purpose of this court, war crimes means a grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of August 12, 1949, namely, any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions of the relevant Geneva Convention: I, willful killing. 2. Torture or inhuman treatment, including biological experiments. 3. Willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health for extensive destruction and appropriation of property, not justified by military necessity, and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. 7. Unlawful deportation, or transfer, or unlawful confinement. B. Other serious violations of the laws and customs applicable in international armed conflict within the established framework of international law, namely, any of the following acts: I, intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. 2. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives. Statement of the facts: there are at least 17 official orders signed by Mehmed Talaat Pasha, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie Mehmed Talaat Pasha to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the determination of the Armenian population. March 1915, January 1916. Exhibit 1 to the Government of Aleppo, March 9, 1915. All rights of the Armenians to live and work on Turkish soil have been completely cancelled. And with regard to this, the government takes all responsibility on itself and has commanded that even babes in the cradle are not to be spared. The results of carrying out this order have been seen in some provinces. In spite of this, for reasons unknown to us, exceptional measures are taken with certain people. And those people, instead of being set straight to the place of exile, are left in Aleppo, whereby the government is involved in an additional difficulty. Without listening to any of their reasoning, remove them thence, women or children, whatever they may be, even if they are incapable of moving. And do not let the people protect them, because, through their ignorance, they place material gains higher than patriotic feelings, and cannot appreciate the great policy of the government in insisting upon this. Because instead of the indirect measures of extermination used in other places, such as severity, haste in carrying out the deportations, difficulties of traveling, and misery, direct measures can safely be used there, so work heartily. General orders have been communicated from the War Office to all the commanders of the army that they are not to interfere in the work of deportation. Tell the officials that are to be appointed for that purpose that they must work to put into execution our real intent, without being afraid of responsibility. Please send cipher reports of the results of your activities every week. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 2, March 25, 1915 to Jemal Bey. Delegate at Adana, the duty of everyone is to effect on the broadest lines possible the realization of the noble project of wiping out of existence the well-known elements who for centuries have been the barrier to the empire's progress in civilization. We must, therefore, take upon ourselves the entire responsibility, pledging ourselves to this action no matter what happens, and always remembering how great is the sacrifice which the government has made in entering the World War. We must work so that the means used may lead to the desired end. In our dispatch dated February 18th, we announced that the Jemiat has decided to uproot and annihilate the different forces which for centuries have been a hindrance for this purpose. It is forced to resort to very bloody methods. Certainly the contemplation of these methods horrified us. But the Jemiat saw no other way of ensuring the stability of its work. Ali Riza note, the committee delegate at Aleppo harshly criticized us and urged that we be merciful. Such simplicity is nothing short of stupidity. We will find a place for all those who will not cooperate with us. A place that will wring their delicate heartstrings. Again, let me remind you of the question of property left. This is very important. Watch its distribution with vigilance. Always examine the accounts and the use made of the proceeds. The Jemiat Exhibit 3, September 3, 1915 to the Prefecture of Aleppo. We advise that you include the woman and children also in the orders which have been previously prescribed as to be applied to the males of the intended persons. Select employees of confidence for these duties. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit for September 16th to the Prefecture of Aleppo. You have already been advised that the government, by order of the Jemiat, has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons Armenians living in Turkey. All who oppose this decision and command cannot remain on the official staff of the empire. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be. And no regard must be paid to either age or sex, or to conscientious scruples. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 5 to the Government of Aleppo, September 21, 1915. There is no need for an orphanage. It is not the time to give way to sentiment and feed the orphans, prolonging their lives. Send them away to the desert and inform us. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 6, number 537. To the Government of Aleppo, September 29, 1915. We hear that some of the people and officials are marrying Armenian women. We strictly prohibit this, and urgently recommend that these women shall be picked out and sent away to the desert. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 7, November 18, 1915 to the Prefecture of Aleppo. It appears from the interventions which have recently been made by the American ambassador, note, Mr. Morgenthau at Constantinople, on behalf of his government, that the American consuls are obtaining information by some secret means. They remain unconvinced, despite our assurance that the deportations will be accomplished in safety and comfort. Be careful that events which attract attention shall not occur in connection with those who are near cities and other centers. In view of our present policy, it is most important that foreigners who are in those parts shall be convinced that the expulsion of the Armenians is in reality only deportation. Therefore it is necessary that a show of gentle dealing shall be made for a while, and the usual measures be taken in suitable places. All persons who have given information to the contrary shall be arrested and handed over to the military authorities for trial by court-martial. This order is recommended as very important. Talaat. Exhibit 8, number 691. To the Government of Aleppo. November 23, 1915. Destroy by secret means the Armenians of the eastern provinces who pass into your hands. There. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 9 Government of Aleppo December 1, 1915. In spite of the fact that it is necessary above all to work for the extermination of the Armenian clergy, we hear that they are being sent to suspicious places like Syria and Jerusalem. Such a permit is an unpardonable delinquency. The place of exile of such seditious people is annihilation. I recommend you to act accordingly. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 10 Government of Aleppo December 9, 1915. There is nothing wrong in accepting the telegrams sent to government offices by the Armenians, complaining and protesting against the deeds done to them. But it would be a waste of time to examine them. Tell those who protest to claim their lost rights when they reach their place of exile. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 11 Government of Aleppo number 745 December 11, 1915. We hear that the correspondents of Armenian newspapers traveling in those parts have faked some letters and photographs showing certain criminal actions, which they have given to the American consuls. Arrest and destroy such dangerous persons. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 12 to the Government of Aleppo December 17, 1915. Communicate to those who wish to save themselves from the general deportations by becoming Moslems that they must become Muslims in their places of exile. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 13 number 801. To the Government of Aleppo. December 26, 1915. It has been decided that all Armenians working on the railway or on any other construction shall be sent to their places of deportation. The War Office has given notice of this to the commanders of deportation camps. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit December 14, 29, 1915. To the Prefecture of Aleppo. We are informed that foreign officers are finding along the roads the corpses of the indicated persons, and are photographing them. Have these corpses buried at once and do not allow them to be left near the roads. This order is recommended as very important. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit January 15, 1916. To the Government of Aleppo. We are informed that certain orphanages which have opened also admitted the children of the Armenians. Should this be done through ignorance of our real purpose, or because of contempt of it, the government will view the feeding of such children, or any effort to prolong their lives, as an act completely opposite to its purpose, since it regards the survival of these children as detrimental. I recommend the orphanages not to receive such children, and no attempts are to be made to establish special orphanages for them. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 16 number 840. To the Government of Aleppo. Jan. 16, 1916. We hear that all along the line which runs between Antilai, Aran, and Aleppo there are some 40 or 50,000 Armenians, mostly women and children. Those persons, who are causing a great deal of trouble by remaining on sites which are very important for the dispatch of troops, will be punished with the greatest severity. Therefore communicate with the government of Adana, and send those Armenians to Aleppo immediately, without letting them go further. I am anxiously waiting to hear the result of this within a week. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Exhibit 17 1916. From the Ministry of the Interior to the Governor of Aleppo. Only those orphans who cannot remember the terrors to which their parents have been subjected must be collected and kept. Send the rest away with the caravans. Minister of the Interior, Talaat. Legal Argument 1. Genocide 1. Argument 1. Talaat Pasha is guilty of 4 counts of genocide according to Article 6a. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. A charge of genocide under the Rome Statute Article 6 states that killing members of group Armenians. Evidence for violation of Article 6 can be seen in this written document from Talaat Pasha. Evidence 1. Argument 1. Talaat Pasha is guilty of 4 counts of genocide according to Article 6. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, as well as the circular order of April 24, 1915 that was signed by Mehmed Talaat Pasha, Ministry of Interior, ordering the beginning of Armenian Genocide, General Directorate of National Police Organization 3052, Private Secretary to the Ottoman Army Commander-in-Chief. Following is the copy of the note from the Office of the Prime Minister to the Office of the Commander-in-Chief. Your Highness, Armenian committees with their political revolutionary organizations on the Ottoman lands have long been pursuing to gain an administrative autonomy, and this desire is displayed once more, in no uncertain terms, with the inclusion of the Russian Armenians who have assumed a position against us together with the Dasknak Committee in no time in the regions of Zieten, Bitlis, Shivas, and Van in accordance with the decisions they have previously taken pertaining to inciting of upheavals with all their forces at every opportunity to hinder the welfare and the future of the country when the Ottoman army was in its weakest position and was already engaged in war with the discovery of the bombs, and the Ottoman Armenians joining with the Russian forces by forming voluntary regiments against the Ottoman state. It has become evident that these committees, whose administrative centers are in Europe, bearing the adjective of revolutionary in their titles, have gathered around Kayseri, Shivas and in other provinces in order to incite upheavals in the regions behind and to threat the Ottoman army at every opportunity through their attempts, organizations, and publications. Consequently, the government has taken measures to prevent the continuation of these events and organizations, which are the dens of mischief, thoroughly as previously declared. The immediate closing down of the branches of the Nubars Hinjak and Tashnak committees, as well as of the similar organizations in the capital and in other provinces, seizing of all the documents and the material without any losses, arresting of the leaders and the members of the committees, of the people who have taken part in the activities, of the Armenians who are well known by the police forces, gathering of the suspicious people in an area in the town so as to prevent their escape, launching of researches for weapons in suitable places have been found appropriate. Furthermore, for any inconvenience that might arise, the commanders should be consulted. The measures taken shall be realized justly, and should there be any arrests after the thorough investigations of the documents, the criminals shall be sent to the military courts immediately. Should you approve, I hereby kindly request the issuing of the necessary orders. April 24, 1915. Minister of Internal Affairs Talaat. Evidence for violation of Article 6c can be seen in this written document from Talaat Pasha in the Ambassador's 1918 book, Ambassador's Morgenthau's Story. In Chapter 25, Talaat tells why he deports the Armenians. Morgenthau explains, it was some time before the story of the Armenian atrocities reached the American embassy in all its horrible details. In January and February, fragmentary reports began to filter in, but the tendency was at first to regard them as mere manifestations of the disorders that had prevailed in the Armenian provinces for many years. When the reports came from Urumia, both Enver and Talaat dismissed them as wild exaggerations. And when, for the first time, we heard of the disturbances at Van, these Turkish officials declared that they were nothing more than a mob uprising which they would soon have under control. I now see what was not apparent in those early months. that the Turkish government was determined to keep the news, as long as possible, from the outside world. It was clearly the intention that Europe and America should hear of the annihilation of the Armenian race only after that annihilation had been accomplished. In early April, the authorities arrested about 200 Armenians in Constantinople and sent them into the interior. Many of those who were then deported were educational and social leaders, and men who were prominent in industry and in finance. I knew many of these men and therefore felt a personal interest in their misfortunes. But when I spoke to Talaat about their expulsion, he replied that the government was acting in self-defense. The Armenians at Van, he said, had already shown their abilities as revolutionists. He knew that these leaders in Constantinople were corresponding with the Russians, and he had every reason to fear that they would start an insurrection against the central government. In April, I was suddenly deprived of the privilege of using the cipher for communicating with American consuls. The most rigorous censorship also was applied to letters. Such measures could mean only that things were happening in Asia Minor which the authorities were determined to conceal. But they did not succeed. Though all sorts of impediments were placed to traveling, certain Americans, chiefly missionaries, succeeded in getting through. The definite conviction which these conversations left upon my mind was that Talaat was the most implacable enemy of this persecuted race. He gave me the impression, such is the entry which I find in my diary on August 3rd, that Talaat is the one who desires to crush the poor Armenians. He told me that the Union and Progress Committee had carefully considered the matter in all its details and that the policy which was being pursued was that which they had officially adopted. He said that I must not get the idea that the deportations had been decided upon hastily. In reality, they were the result of prolonged and careful deliberation. To my repeated appeals that he should show mercy to these people, he sometimes responded seriously, sometimes angrily, and sometimes flippantly. "Someday," he once said, "I will come and discuss the whole Armenian subject with you." And then he added, in a low tone in Turkish, "But that day will never come." Talaat Pasha's own words on this subject: genocide. Turkey is taking advantage of the war in order to thoroughly liquidate its internal foes, i.e., the indigenous Christians, without being thereby disturbed by foreign intervention. This was said in a conversation with Dr. Mortman of the German embassy in June 1915. Quoted in The Evil 100-2000 by Martin Gilman Walcott, p. 35. What on earth do you want? The question is settled. There are no more Armenians. He said this to the German ambassador who persistently brought up the Armenian question in 1918. Quoted in The History of the Armenian Genocide 2003 by Vahakn N. Dadrian, p. 211. The Armenians at Van, he said, had already shown their abilities as revolutionists. He knew that these leaders in Constantinople were corresponding with the Russians, and he had every reason to fear that they would start an insurrection against the central government. In April, I was suddenly deprived of the privilege of using the cipher for communicating with American consuls. The most rigorous censorship also was applied to letters. Such measures could mean only that things were happening in Asia Minor which the authorities were determined to conceal. But they did not succeed. Though all sorts of impediments were placed to traveling, certain Americans, chiefly missionaries, succeeded in getting through. The definite conviction which these conversations left upon my mind was that Talaat was the most implacable enemy of this persecuted race. He gave me the impression, such is the entry which I find in my diary on August 3rd, that Talaat is the one who desires to crush the poor Armenians. He told me that the Union and Progress Committee had carefully considered the matter in all its details and that the policy which was being pursued was that which they had officially adopted. He said that I must not get the idea that the deportations had been decided upon hastily in reality. They were the result of prolonged and careful deliberation. To my repeated appeals that he should show mercy to these people, he sometimes responded seriously, sometimes angrily, and sometimes flippantly. Someday, he once said, I will come and discuss the whole Armenian subject with you. And then he added, in a low tone in Turkish, but that day will never come. Talaat Pasha's own words on this subject: genocide. Turkey is taking advantage of the war in order to thoroughly liquidate its internal foes, i.e. the indigenous Christians, without being thereby disturbed by foreign intervention. This was said in a conversation with Dr. Mortman of the German embassy in June 1915. Quoted in The Evil 100-2000 by Martin Gilman Walcott, p. 35. What on earth do you want? The question is settled. There are no more Armenians. He said this to the German ambassador, who persistently brought up the Armenian question in 1918. Quoted in The History of the Armenian Genocide, 2003 by Vahakn N. Dadrian, p. 211. Talaat Pasha's own words on this subject: genocide. Continued, we need to tranquilize our neighbors. State officials ought to remain in ignorance. Let the Armenians wait, opportunities will certainly come our way too. Turkey belongs only to the Turks. Quoted in Blood and Soil, A World History of Genocide and Extermination, page 405 by Ben Kiernan. Social Science, 2007. I have accomplished more towards solving the Armenian problem in 3 months than Abdul Hamid accomplished in 30 years. Quoted in The Burning Tigris, The Armenian Genocide and America's Response, page 157 by Peter Balakian. History, 2003. Necessary preparations have been discussed and taken for the complete and fundamental elimination of this concern, which occupies an important place in the exalted state's list of vital issues. Letter to the Head of Parliament, May 26, 1915. Quoted in A Shameful Act, The Armenian Genocide and the Question of Turkish Responsibility by Taner Akam, Paul Bessemer. History, 2006, page 8. In conclusion, I would like to state that we should also look at the conversations that Talaat Pasha had with U.S. Ambassador on Saturday, April 24, 1915, according to Morgenthau diary entry of that date. He had a dinner party on that night with Talaat. He had a conversation about the Zionist movement in Turkey. Morgenthau suggested that Turkey should embrace the Zionist movement. Talaat told him that he didn't want to trust the Zionists and didn't want non-Turks in the empire. Morgenthau then asked about Armenians. He was told by Talaat that the Armenians were arrested and would be moved to the interior of the country where they could do no harm. No harm, Your Honor. We cannot have this, and we shall not have this. This is a clear-cut case of genocide, plain and simple. And you should return guilty verdict on all 4 counts of genocide. Article 6. A killing members of the group be causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. If there are no further questions, I will stand down and allow my partner speak on the second argument. Thank you, and vote to convict Talaat Pasha.
Chief Justice, Associate Justices, and may it please the Court, Your Honors. My partner talked about genocide and war crimes. I will talk about the crimes against humanity. Please cross-apply their arguments. A charge of crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute Article 7 states that a murder exists when you order groups of people to be killed. B. Extermination exists when you order it to happen. C. Enslavement exists when you order people to murder other or be murdered yourself. D. Deportation or forcible transfer of population when ordered such to happen. E. Imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international Law F. Torture ordered the denial of food, supplies, or healthcare to Armenians. H. Persecution against any identifiable group or collectivity on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, or religious group. Ambassador Morgenthau 1918 book. Ambassador Morgenthau's story. One of the best sources of material on this subject would be Talaat Pasha's documented conversations with U.S. Ambassador to the Ottoman Empire Ambassador Morgenthau, as published in his 1918 book. Ambassador Morgenthau's story. Suppose a few Armenians did betray you, I said. Is that a reason for destroying a whole race? Is that an excuse for making innocent women and children suffer? Those things are inevitable, he replied. This remark to me was not quite so illuminating as one which Talaat made subsequently to a reporter of the Berliner Tageblatt, who asked him the same question. We have been reproached, he said, according to this interviewer, for making no distinction between the innocent Armenians and the guilty, but that was utterly impossible, in view of the fact that those who were innocent today might be guilty tomorrow. One reason why Talaat could not discuss this matter with me freely was because the member of the embassy staff who did the interpreting was himself an Armenian. In the early part of August, therefore, he sent a personal messenger to me, asking if I could not see him alone. He said that he himself would provide the interpreter. This was the first time that Talaat had admitted that his treatment of the Armenians was a matter with which I had any concern. The interview took place 2 days afterward. It so happened that since the last time I had visited Talaat, I had shaved my beard. As soon as I came in, the burly minister began talking in his customary bantering fashion. On every one of these points I had plenty of arguments in rebuttal. Talaat's first objection was merely an admission that the Armenians were more industrious and more able than the dull-witted and lazy Turks. Massacre as a means of destroying business competition was certainly an original conception. His general charge that the Armenians were conspiring against Turkey and that they openly sympathized with Turkey's enemies merely meant, when reduced to its original elements, that the Armenians were constantly appealing to the European powers to protect them against robbery, murder, and outrage. The Armenian problem, like most race problems, was the result of centuries of ill treatment and injustice. There could be only one solution for it: the creation of an orderly system of government, in which all citizens were to be treated upon an equality, and in which all offenses were to be punished as the acts of individuals and not as of peoples. I argued for a long time along these and similar lines. It is no use for you to argue, Talaat answered. We have already disposed of 3/4 of the Armenians. There are none at all left in Bitlis, Van, and Erzurum. The hatred between the Turks and the Armenians is now so intense that we have got to finish with them. If we don't, they will plan their revenge. If you are not influenced by humane considerations, I replied, think of the material loss. These people are your businessmen. They control many of your industries. They are very large taxpayers. What would become of you commercially without them? We care nothing about the commercial loss, replied Talaat. We have figured all that out, and we know that it will not exceed £5 million. We don't worry about that. I have asked you to come here so as to let you know that our Armenian policy is absolutely fixed, and that nothing can change it. We will not have the Armenians anywhere in Anatolia. They can live in the desert but nowhere else. I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared to the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1915. Henry Morgenthau, senior U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. The Armenian genocide was carried out by the Young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire in 1915-1916, with subsidiaries to 1923. 1.5 million Armenians were killed, out of a total of 2 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. Talaat Pasha's own words, posthumous memoirs. 1925. Perhaps the most damning thing here is Talaat Pasha's own words. In his autobiography, Talaat stated, "The deportation of the Armenians in some localities of the Greeks, and in Syria of some of the Arabs, was used inside and outside the empire as a source of attack on the Turkish government. First of all, I wish to inform the public that the rumors of deportation and assassination were exceedingly exaggerated. The Greeks and the Armenians, taking advantage of the ignorance of the American and European public of the Near Eastern situation and of the character of the Turks, used the deportation as a means for propaganda and painted it as best suited their aim. In saying this, I do not mean to deny the facts. I desire only to eliminate the exaggerations and to relate the facts as they occurred. Blame the victim approach. This is rich and in many aspects a clever argument to blame the victim for the crime. Somehow the arrested were to blame for their own arrest and subsequent murders." Talaat then goes on to state that there was another group who sincerely believed that the general interest of the community necessitated the punishment alike of those Armenians who massacred the guiltless Mohammedans and those who helped the Armenian bandits to endanger our national life. The Turkish elements here referred to were short-sighted, fanatic, and yet sincere in their belief. The public encouraged them, and they had the general approval behind them. They were numerous and strong. As to the deportation of the Greeks and the Armenians, this charge is based more on propaganda than on real fact. These preventive measures were taken in every country during the war, but while the regrettable results were passed over in silence in the other countries, the echo of our acts was heard the world over, because everybody's eyes were upon us. Basically, his only justification for innocence is that victims made the criminals attack them because they deserved it. This is not accept then, it is not acceptable now. And it is not acceptable forever. Argument 3, for counts of war crimes. Article 8A, I, 2, 3, 4B. 2. Crime against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population. With knowledge of the attack, war crimes means a grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949, namely, any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions of the relevant Geneva Convention. I. Willful killing. 2. Torture or inhuman treatment, including biological experiments. 3. Willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health for extensive destruction and appropriation of property, not justified by military necessity, and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. 7. Unlawful deportation or transfer or unlawful confinement. B. Other serious violations of the laws and customs applicable in international armed conflict within the established framework of international law, namely, any of the following acts, I. Intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. 2. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives. Christians in great peril, Talaat Pasha declares, written in the New York Times January 12, 1915. It is asserted in well-informed circles that the Turks for the present have abandoned their advance against Egypt. In Constantinople, anxiety regarding the possible forcing of the Dardanelles continues. It is evident that the situation for Christians is extremely precarious even in the large cities, and Talaat Pasha, the Minister of the Interior, has stated Turkey henceforth there will be room only for Turks. It is confirmed that the Armenians should be transferred to the indicated region as communicated in the February 13 telegram. As the situation has been evaluated by the state, the probability of rebellion and protest indicates the need to take action. The increasing possibility of Armenian uprisings requires that every effective means of suppression needs to be applied. March 2. Quoted in a shameful act, the Armenian genocide and The Question of Turkish Responsibility, by Taner Akam, Paul Bessemer. History 2006 page 159 Argument 4, had the war crimes tribunals held in Constantinople been given the opportunity to uncover evidence and document high-level testimony, this would have taken place 100 years ago. As early as May of 1915, the Allied powers formally accused the Ottoman government of crimes against humanity, a term which would be made infamous 30 years later following the Holocaust. However, following World War I, France focused its outrage on Germany and pursued rapprochement with the Turks. After the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, Russia lost all interest in bringing the Young Turks to justice. And despite the well-documented and harrowing accounts of American diplomats, including Ambassador Henry Morgenthau Sr., America did not take serious steps to punish murders that killed non-Americans. More than any other Allied power, Britain took the massacre of Armenians seriously. In 1918, Britain had an occupying force of over 1 million soldiers in the Ottoman Empire, which allowed it to exert extensive pressure on the post-war government of Sultan Mehmet VI. Furthermore, the developed British legal system wanted to hold individual members of Ottoman leadership criminally responsible for war crimes. The Sultan, however, feared that if he took large-scale action to prosecute the Young Turks, it would provoke a nationalist revolution where he would be overthrown. Early war crime trials. The first verdicts handed down by the tribunals found Major Tevfik Bey, commander of the Yozgat police, and Yozgat Lieutenant Governor Kemal Bey guilty of organizing deportations, murder, pillage, robbery and crimes against humanity and civilization. Tevfik was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor and Kemal to death. Kemal Bey's funeral became a rallying point for Turkish nationalists who were still not convinced Turks had done wrong during the war, and were insulted that punishments were being doled out for killing Christians. The courts-martial continued against prominent leaders, including Said Halim Pasha, as well as those who had fled to Germany, including Talaat and Enver, who were tried and sentenced to death in absentia. The indictment of Talaat and Enver read in part, "The disaster visiting the Armenians was not a local or isolated event. It was the result of a premeditated decision taken by a central body, and the immolations and excesses which took place were based on oral and written orders issued by the central body." At the same time, politics began destroying the domestic tribunals. The British Army presence shrank by over 2/3 along with its authority, as dozens of the accused Turks began being released. The British gave up on the Ottoman trials and decided to take custody of 68 of the most prominent prisoners who were guilty of the most heinous crimes and transfer them to a British detention center in Malta. This left the Turkish courts-martial a toothless farce. Unfortunately, the British were slow to set up tribunals even after the signing of the Treaty of Sèvres in August 1920, which included 5 articles on war crimes, including language calling for Turks guilty of criminal acts to be brought before the military tribunals, and even carved out a new independent Armenian state. The British were left in a quagmire, not wanting to release the prisoners and not having the political will to prosecute. As Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's nationalist revolt gained strength, defeating French troops in Cilicia, the British began cutting their losses. By 1920, War Secretary Winston Churchill was clearly weary of the entire issue. He wanted to make sure that Ataturk would not be pushed into the arms of the Soviet Union. When pressed to choose between prosecuting war criminals and protecting British soldiers, Churchill did not hesitate to advocate choosing the latter. The final straw came in August of 1921 when Ataturk's nationalists took a group of 29 Britons hostage and demanded the release of all Turkish prisoners who remained in Malta jails. All 59 remaining Turks in custody were subsequently freed. Finally, as a further insult, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed in July 1923 by Ataturk, containing no clauses on war crimes tribunals and no mention of an independent Armenia. British Prime Minister Lloyd George referred to the treaty as an abject, cowardly and infamous surrender. Had the war crimes tribunals held in Constantinople been given the opportunity to uncover evidence and document high-level testimony, as was stipulated by the Treaty of Sèvres, it would have been significantly more difficult for subsequent Turkish governments to deny, distort or minimize Turkish culpability for the Armenian genocide. For Britain, it was in their strategic interest to leave Constantinople. For Ataturk, nationalist fervor led to the establishment of the Turkish Republic on the blood of murdered Armenians. For the Armenians, abandoned by the international community, justice became an elusive concept. Unlike Germany, whose Nazi-era leaders were held criminally responsible and punished, the Turkish Republic has never confronted the Armenian genocide. In the short run, the lack of adequate criminal prosecution of young Turk leaders following the Armenian genocide led to vigilante justice to preserve Armenian dignity. In the long run, it has caused decades of denial and has given a path for the successor state to avoid reparations. However, during the past 5 decades, Armenians worldwide have persevered to attain global recognition of the Armenian genocide. While the perpetrator generation of Turks may have escaped justice, what remains is the civil and territorial compensation to the Armenian people from the benefactors of genocide. 14 different crimes were committed by Talaat Pasha. These include, for counts of genocide Article 6A, B, C, E, 6 counts of crimes against humanity Article 7A, B, C, D, E, H, and 4 counts of war crimes Article 8A, I, 2, 3, 4B, 2. Conviction on these counts are based on at least 17 official orders signed by Talaat Pasha, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie Talaat Pasha to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the destruction of the Armenian population. March 1915, January 1916, as well his own conversations with New York Times and U.S. Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. This trial has been long overdue, and its importance is brought out in our fourth argument. The mere fact that Talaat Pasha was convicted in absentia in a war crime tribunal held in Constantinople in 1919 should only go to help prove his guilt today. The difference between now and then was that Mehmed Talaat Pasha was able to escape judgment, then not escape his guilt. Today, make two come together and convict him of 14 different crimes. These include 4 counts of genocide Article 6A, B, C, E, with 6 counts of crimes against humanity Article 7A, B, C, D, E, H, and with 4 counts of war crimes Article 8A, I, 2, 3, 4B. 2 counter-arguments. First, Talaat Pasha only ordered the deportation of the Armenians. According to Talaat's report, over 1 million Ottoman Armenians had disappeared between 1914 and 1917, with the remaining population divided amongst those who were resident in Constantinople and were not deported, and those who were natives and outsiders in the provinces. Practically all who were outsiders were remnants of those who had been removed from their native provinces in 1915-16, while native Armenians were those who were not deported outside of their home provinces. The data in the 1917 report would have been interpreted in a more informed manner by Talaat Pasha, who had privileged knowledge about the Armenian issue. For example, Talaat knew that all Ottoman Armenians were supposed to be counted for his official report, i.e., Apostolic, Catholic, and Protestant Armenians, as well as recent converts to Islam, although this detail was not explicitly stated. Talaat was also aware that many thousands of Armenian women and children had been taken into Muslim households, or scattered in central and western provinces, to be absorbed into Muslim communities. Then there was the question of Armenians who had escaped from the Ottoman Empire, such as those who resisted Ottoman forces in Van in April 1915, as well as those who managed to flee across the Russian border in 1915-16. The number of people who escaped was probably around 150,000, and their ultimate survival was by no means clear. Thousands subsequently perished from privation and disease. In the final analysis, the great majority of Ottoman Armenians were deported in 1915. And the great majority of these deportees were killed off through forced marches, privations, and outright massacres as attested and corroborated by eyewitness accounts. Second, Talaat Pasha could not be charged with these crimes. In 1921 Mr. Talerian, a 24-year-old Armenian, had rented an apartment in an upscale neighborhood of Berlin in order to surveil Talaat Pasha's daily routine. Talaat Pasha was the former Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire and architect of the Armenian genocide. Talerian was himself a survivor of the genocide that killed many of his family members. On the morning of March 15, 1921, Talerian got his chance. He followed Talaat Pasha from his house and shot the former Ottoman official at the base of his neck. Talerian's murder trial was a sensational event. At every chance, Talerian admitted that he had assassinated Talaat Pasha. But he never felt any guilt. In his mind, Talerian had avenged the murder of millions of Armenians. Talerian's defense lawyers argued something of a temporary insanity defense. And a 12-man jury acquitted him. Hundreds of miles away, a young linguistics student was troubled by the legal consequences of the trial. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish Jew, studying linguistics at the University of Lviv. Talerian's trial affected Lemkin for a central reason: Talerian did not have a legal recourse to bring Talaat Pasha to justice for the Armenian genocide. In fact, the word genocide did not even exist. Genocide describes the deliberate and systematic extermination of a national, racial, political, or cultural group. Genocides have occurred numerous times throughout history, even before the concept existed. Roman emperors fed Christians to lions. French Huguenots were killed en masse by the country's predominantly Catholic population. The Trail of Tears was a series of forced relocations of approximately 60,000 Native Americans, thousands of whom died during the journey. These examples, among countless others, directly targeted minority groups within a country. As far as other countries were concerned, these atrocities were considered internal matters. In the early 20th century, the concept of state sovereignty protected Turkey from any ramifications from the Armenian genocide. What the Ottoman Empire did to its own people within its own borders was its own business, legally speaking. Lemkin was so moved by Talerian's trial that he decided to become a law student. He began his remarkable career as a prosecutor in Warsaw. In 1933, the same year in which Adolf Hitler attained power in Germany, Lemkin lobbied the League of Nations to recognize the crime of barbarity. He argued that certain crimes, such as murder, were illegal in virtually every country. Therefore, per his proposal, someone could be arrested and tried for that crime in any country, regardless of where the crime had occurred. He specifically highlighted incidents in which ethnic or religious minorities were massacred by their own countrymen. His proposal to the League of Nations fell on deaf ears. The next chapter of Lemkin's career began when Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939. When German soldiers crossed into Poland, Lemkin fled to Lithuania, making his way to neutral Sweden and eventually the United States. Along the way, he encouraged family members and fellow Jews to flee with him. While many Jews heard the rising anti-Semitism in Hitler's language, large swaths of them were unconvinced that Hitler would follow through on his worst impulses. Lemkin had spent the last decade studying mass atrocities against minority groups. As a result, he was aware that Hitler posed a specific danger to the Jewish people. A few months after his arrival in the United States, Winston Churchill described Nazi war crimes in a radio address. Whole districts are being exterminated. Scores of thousands, literally scores of thousands of executions in cold blood are being perpetrated by the German police troops, Churchill said. We are in the presence of a crime without a name. Before becoming a lawyer, Lemkin had been a linguist. He was aware of the power words had. Therefore, he endeavored to define the crime without a name. One of Lemkin's greatest legacies was his book Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. Published in 1944 by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The book dryly recounted laws in Nazi Germany. But it also introduced a new word to the world, genocide. Lemkin wrote, "By genocide, we mean the destruction of a nation or of an ethnic group." This new word, coined by the author to denote an old practice in its modern development, is made from the ancient Greek word genos, race, tribe, and the Latin side, killing. Generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Genocide is directed against the national group as an entity, and the actions involved are directed against individuals, not in their individual capacity, but as members of the national group. Genocide combined the ancient Greek word genos, race, tribe, and the Latin side, killing. The word could be easily translated into many languages because of its root words, and it was simple to pronounce. Lemkin served with American lawyers in the Nuremberg trials after the war concluded. He was able to insert genocide in the indictments against Nazi leadership, although genocide was not yet considered an international crime. Lemkin also learned in Nuremberg that his brother, his brother's wife, and their children were the only members of Lemkin's family to survive the war. 49 members of his family, including his parents, perished in the Holocaust. Lemkin found more career success with the newly created United Nations. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was unanimously adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Article 2 of the Convention defined genocide as any of the following acts: committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, as such, a killing members of the group; B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group; C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part; D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group; E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. While genocide has not stopped since the convention, it is now considered an international crime as a result of Lemkin's lifelong work. Your decision is clear: you must convict Talaat Pasha for these crimes for justice to be. He spent the rest of his life lobbying countries, including the United States, to ratify the convention. Lemkin died in 1959. In conclusion, Your Honors, we would like to briefly the strategy that Talleyrand's lawyers planned in his two-part defense. First, they would argue that Talleyrand was temporarily insane at the time of the murder. To support his claim, Talleyrand told the court that 2 weeks before the murder his mother, who had been killed during the genocide, appeared to him in a vision, exhorting him to kill Talaat as an act of revenge for the atrocities committed against the Armenian people. The second part of the strategy was to put the victim on trial. To support their case, Talleyrand's lawyers were able to get support from two prominent Germans: Johannes Lepsius, who had recently published a book about the atrocities perpetrated against the Armenians by the Turks, and General Lyman von Sanders, the former leader of the German military mission in the Ottoman Empire. Testifying in Talleyrand's defense, Lepsius detailed the systematic plans for what he called the elimination of the Armenians in Armenia. Lepsius testified to Talaat's role in the massacres of the Armenians, and told the court that he had physical documentary evidence to prove his allegations. Lepsius's overview was followed by the testimony of General von Sanders, who described the callousness of German military officials who watched the massacre of Armenians, but failed to intervene. During the trial, 5 messages with Talaat's signature were entered into evidence, including one in which Talaat ordered that Armenian children who were living in orphanages after the murder of their parents be killed in order to eliminate further danger from antagonistic elements. After 1 hour of deliberations, Talerian was acquitted. He was acquitted of murder because Talaat was under the sentence of death for the murder of Armenians from 1915-1919. Petition overall, weigh the evidence presented in this court today. Weigh the 1.5 million souls who died, weigh the fact that this is not a historical debate. It is a matter of fact. It is not folly, fancy, or lack of luck that brought us to this courtroom today. It is to finally get justice for the peoples that history forgot. The genocide that began the 20th century. And a genocide that is still waiting today to finally come to an end. You have, Your Honor, a decision to make. You can turn your back on the truth and let this genocide go on, or you can put a stop to it right now. Thank you, and may you please finally set history straight once and for all with convicting Talaat Pashas on all 14 counts.